What really happens when you rent a girlfriend in Manila for 24 hours? Not a hookup, not a tourist fling. A full day together, meals, conversations, sightseeing, as if you were a real couple. For most Western travelers, the concept sounds somewhere between fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. But in Manila, these arrangements exist in plain sight, operating in a quiet gray area between loneliness and transaction. Some men swear it's nothing more than paid companionship, harmless, honest, straightforward. Others walk away with something they didn't expect, feelings they weren't prepared for. We followed one traveler who decided to find out for himself. He went in with curiosity and zero emotional investment. By hour 12, the dynamic had already shifted. By hour 24, he was questioning things that had nothing to do with the arrangement itself. What started as an experiment ended up being a mirror, and what he saw surprised him. This is a real-life story from David. However, images have been generated to protect his identity, but the story remains valid. So let's get into the details of the story. So, how does renting a girlfriend actually work? Most people who've never been to the Philippines picture something like a storefront. Neon lights, a laminated menu, a bored receptionist behind a glass window, a girlfriend rental office, like you'd rent a car or book a hotel room. Clinical, transactional, easy to find. But that's not how it works at all. Everything happens quietly, in the spaces between things. A message on a social media app, a referral from someone who knows someone, a conversation that starts casually and leads somewhere unexpected. There are no offices, no signs, no paper trail, just people, connecting the way people have always connected, in the shadows of ordinary life. David was 52 years old, Australian, and freshly divorced when he landed in Manila for the first time. He worked in construction management, spent most of his life being practical, and had booked this trip on something close to impulse, a desire to be somewhere completely unfamiliar, somewhere nobody knew his name or his story. The Philippines had come up in a conversation at a bar back in Sydney, and 3 weeks later, he was standing in the arrivals hall of Ninoy Aquino International Airport, suitcase in hand, no plan beyond the name of his hotel. He spent his first 3 days doing what cautious first-time travelers do. He stayed close to his hotel in Makati. He ate at restaurants that had English menus and staff who spoke to him patiently. He walked through malls the size of small cities and sat in air-conditioned coffee shops, watching the endless river of people move past. Manila was loud and alive in a way that both energized and slightly overwhelmed him. He was enjoying himself, but there was a loneliness underneath it. The particular loneliness of traveling alone at 52, in a city where everyone around you seems to belong to someone. That's when another expat, a British man he'd met at a hotel rooftop bar, said something that stayed with him. "You know you can hire a girlfriend for the day here, right?" David laughed. The way you laugh at something that catches you off guard, not because it's funny, but because you don't know what else to do with it. The British man shrugged, ordered another beer, and changed the subject. But later that night, alone in his hotel room with the city glowing orange outside his window, David found himself thinking about it, not with urgency, more like the way you turn a strange coin over in your hand, just to see what's on the other side. He did some reading, asked a careful question in an expat forum, and eventually, through a chain of messages he later described as feeling surprisingly normal, he connected with a woman named Anna. She was 29. Her profile photos showed a woman with a bright, open smile and sharp eyes. She wrote in clean, fluid English, not the halting, translated feeling English he'd expected, but real English, with humor in it. She explained simply that she sometimes spent time with foreign visitors who wanted company while they explored the city. Someone to show them around. Someone to have a real conversation with over dinner. She called it companionship. The agreement, as she laid it out, was straightforward. 24 hours together. Meals, sightseeing, and conversation. No expectations beyond good company. At least, that's what he was told. David said yes. They arranged to meet the following afternoon. He almost canceled twice. Standing outside his hotel the next morning, he told himself it was strange, possibly embarrassing, and he was a grown adult who didn't need to pay for company. But by 2 o'clock, he was in a taxi heading toward one of Manila's colossal shopping malls. The kind of place so large it has its own weather system, cool and humming with thousands of people, with restaurants and cinemas and music spilling out from every corridor like light through open doors. They'd agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the 3rd floor. He arrived early, ordered water, watched the crowd, and then Anna walked in. The first thing David noticed was that she looked exactly like her photos. In his experience, limited as it was with this kind of thing, that alone felt like a minor miracle. But that wasn't what stopped him. What stopped him was something harder to name. She moved through the coffee shop with the ease of someone who was completely comfortable in her own skin. No performance, no scanning the room to calculate how she was being perceived. She spotted him, smiled like she was genuinely glad to see him, and sat down as if they were two old friends who met here every week. "You look nervous," she said. "I am nervous," he admitted. She laughed, and just like that, the tension dissolved. Within 20 minutes, they were deep in conversation. She asked about his life in Australia, what he built, what it felt like to manage construction on large projects, whether he'd always been practical, or if that was something he'd grown into. She asked why he'd chosen the Philippines. He told her about the divorce, more than he'd intended to, and she listened the way good listeners do, without filling every silence, without rushing to comfort or advise. She just let him talk. She was warm in the way he'd heard Filipinos described, but hadn't quite believed until now. Not performatively warm, genuinely warm, curious about him in a way that felt real. And then something shifted, subtly, like a change in light. At some point during that first hour, David became aware of how they must have looked to everyone around them. Two people at a small table, coffee between them, leaning slightly toward each other, laughing, just a couple. Nobody glanced over. Nobody raised an eyebrow. The thousands of people flowing past the glass windows of that coffee shop saw nothing unusual, nothing to question, nothing at all. Just two people, together, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. And that was when David understood that this experience was going to be nothing like what he had imagined. The mall had its own gravity. That's the only way David could describe it afterward. The way the place pulled you in and held you there, not through any one thing, but through the sheer accumulation of life happening inside it. Music drifting from a store entrance, the smell of grilled meat from a food court 3 floors down. A child is laughing somewhere behind him. Anna had suggested they walk after coffee, and he'd agreed without thinking, because agreeing felt natural, and because the afternoon had already stopped feeling like what he'd expected it to be. "This is how people spend their weekends here," Anna said, gesturing at the crowd around them. "Not just shopping, just being somewhere together." He understood immediately what she meant. Back in Sydney, malls were places you went to buy something and left as quickly as possible. Functional, slightly depressing. Here, The mall was the destination itself, a social universe with its own weather, its own rhythms. Couples walked hand in hand past glittering storefronts. Grandmothers sat on benches watching grandchildren eat ice cream. Groups of teenagers claimed corners and photographed everything, themselves most of all. Families spread across restaurant tables as they had nowhere else to be, and no desire to be there. As David and Anna moved through the crowd, he noticed something he couldn't quite shake. People smiled at them. Not the careful customer service smile of someone doing their job. Something warmer than that. A waiter near the restaurant entrance caught David's eye and nodded as if welcoming back a regular. A security guard stepped aside and gave a small, respectful dip of the head. An older woman glanced at them, then smiled at Anna with the particular warmth of someone who approves of what she sees. To all of them, the story was obvious. A couple spending the afternoon together. David found it unsettling, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something more like vertigo, the strangeness of being read as something, of fitting so neatly into a story that wasn't entirely his own. Then Anna said something that changed the texture of the day entirely. They had paused near a row of shops selling clothing and accessories, and Anna was looking at a display window with the distracted expression of someone whose mind was somewhere else entirely. When she spoke, it was quietly, almost to herself at first. Most of the women who do this spend time with foreigners. They're not doing it as a career, she said. It's not who they are. It's just something they do for a while. David looked at her. She was still watching the window. Some of them are in university, she continued. Some have regular office jobs during the week. Some are the eldest daughters in their family, and there's a younger sibling who needs school fees, or a parent with medical bills, or a roof that needs fixing before the rainy season. She paused. Family comes first here. It always comes first. And sometimes that means doing things you wouldn't choose to do if you had every other option available. She said it plainly, without drama or self-pity, just a fact laid on the table between them. David didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. They walked on. But the afternoon had shifted. What had felt until that moment like a pleasant and slightly surreal adventure, a story he'd tell carefully and selectively to friends back home, had suddenly become something else. It had a weight to it now, a texture. Anna wasn't a character in his holiday. She was a person with a life that extended in every direction beyond this mall, this afternoon, this arrangement. He wasn't sure whether that made things better or worse, but he knew it made them more real. For lunch, they chose a Filipino restaurant on the 4th floor, the kind of place with wooden tables and a menu that required a guide. Anna ordered without hesitating, grilled chicken, garlic rice, and a plate of something David couldn't identify, but which smelled extraordinary. Fresh mango juice arrived in tall glasses, and when the dessert menu came, Anna pointed to the halo with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "You have to try it," she said. "It's non-negotiable." When it arrived, a towering glass filled with crushed ice, bright fruit, purple yams, sweet beans, and what appeared to be a small scoop of ice cream balanced on top, David stared at it for a long moment. "It looks like something a child invented," he said. "It was," she replied, already eating hers. "That's why it's perfect." He laughed. She was right. Over lunch, the conversation moved into different territory. Less polite, more honest. They talked about relationships, what they look like in Australia, what they looked like here, how differently two cultures could frame the same human need. Anna talked openly, without apparent embarrassment, about the experience of dating foreign men versus Filipino men. Foreigners are more direct, she said. They tell you what they want. They'll say, "I like you" on the second day, and not think anything of it. Here, that would mean something very serious. There are rules, expectations. Your family's opinion matters. His family's opinion matters. She speared a piece of chicken thoughtfully. Sometimes it's exhausting. But then she set her fork down and looked at him directly. But the other problem, she said, is that some foreigners confuse friendliness with something else. David held her gaze. Meaning? Meaning that if a Filipino woman smiles at you, makes you feel welcome, takes care of you, some men decide that means she has feelings for them, that the warmth is personal. She shook her head slightly. It's not always personal. Sometimes it's just who we are, how we were raised. Kindness isn't always an invitation. The table was quiet for a moment. David thought about the past 24 hours, the easy laughter in the coffee shop, the way she'd listened to him talk about his divorce, the smiles from strangers in the mall. He thought about what he had assumed, without quite realizing he'd assumed it. "That's a fair warning," he said finally. Anna smiled, but it was a different kind of smile than the ones before, more complicated, more considered. "It's not a warning," she said. "It's just the truth." And somewhere in the gap between those two things, David understood that the day had stopped being a story about him discovering something about Manila and had become something much harder to categorize. He just didn't know it yet. The taxi driver took them west, toward the bay, and Manila peeled back its shopping mall skin to reveal something older underneath. Narrower streets, faded colonial buildings with laundry strung between windows, street vendors crouched over small grills, smoke rising in thin columns into the late afternoon sky. Children chasing each other across a patch of concrete that had once, optimistically, been painted as a basketball court. David watched it all through the window without speaking, and for the first time since landing in the Philippines, he felt the city as something more than a backdrop. It had a history, a texture, layers of things that had happened here long before he arrived and would continue long after he left. Manila Bay opened up in front of them like a held breath finally released. They found a low concrete seawall and sat, close but not touching, as the sun began its long descent into the water. What followed was one of those sunsets that seem almost unreasonable, the kind that makes you think someone has made a mistake with the colors. The sky went orange, then deep amber, then a bruised and luminous pink that reflected off the surface of the bay and turned the whole world briefly golden. The noise of the city, always present, always pressing, softened to something almost manageable. A distant horn, a child's voice somewhere behind them, the slow slap of water against stone. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Anna said quietly, "I want to open a cafe someday." David looked at her. She was watching the water. "Small, nothing fancy. Maybe near my parents' house, so I could look after them and still work." She paused. "Or an online shop, maybe. Something I own. Something that's mine." He didn't offer advice. He'd learned over the course of the day that Anna wasn't asking for solutions. She was simply allowing him to see something real. He accepted that in the spirit it was offered, so he gave her something real in return. He talked about his marriage, 21 years, not unhappy exactly, but slowly hollowed out by routine and the particular loneliness of two people who have stopped surprising each other. He talked about the divorce, how it had arrived not as a dramatic rupture, but as a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that the life they'd built together no longer fit either of them. He talked about his work, the satisfaction of building things that stood, the strange emptiness of arriving home to a house that held no one. "I booked this trip 3 days after the divorce was finalized," he said. "I don't fully know why." "I think you do," Anna said. He considered that. The sun was nearly gone now, just a thin, burning line above the horizon. "I feel like myself when I travel," he admitted. "More than I have in years, like I stepped out of something and remembered I was still in here somewhere." Anna nodded slowly. Then she turned to look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not sympathy, something more level than that. "Most foreigners who come here are looking for something," she said. "Adventure, romance, a version of themselves they like better." She looked back at the water. "But most of them leave with something they didn't come for. They leave with perspective. They see how other people live, what other people want, what's actually necessary, and what they just decided was necessary. That's worth more than adventure." David didn't respond immediately. He sat with it. She was right, and he knew she was right, and what surprised him was how long it had taken someone to say it plainly. By night, Manila was a different animal entirely. The air thickened with heat and possibility. Traffic lights smeared through humidity like watercolors. Street food vendors appeared from nowhere, filling the sidewalks with the smell of grilled meat, garlic, and something sweet he couldn't identify. Music leaked from every doorway. Pop songs, old ballads, something with a live trumpet that made him slow down without meaning to. Anna led him to a rooftop restaurant she clearly knew well. The kind of place with no sign out front, reached by an elevator that opened directly onto a terrace strung with lights. The Manila skyline spread out in every direction like a circuit board lit from within. A waiter who recognized her brought menus without being asked. They talked for 3 hours, about everything and nothing, about dreams that had shifted shape over the years, about regrets that had softened from sharp to dull without ever quite disappearing, about the strange mathematics of how two people from completely different worlds, different countries, different decades, different everything, could end up sitting across from each other on a rooftop, sharing food, and finding that the conversation came easily. Somewhere around the second hour, David noticed something. He had stopped thinking about the arrangement entirely. There was no transaction in the room, no performance, no careful management of expectations. Just two people who had spent a day together, and through some quiet accumulation of honest moments, had arrived somewhere neither of them had planned to go. He thought about what he'd expected when he first messaged Anna, the story he'd told himself about what this day would be, how completely and how gently it had refused to be that story. There's a version of this story that's easy to tell. Man pays for the company. A man spends a day in a foreign city. Man goes home. Clean edges. Simple moral. The kind of story that confirms whatever you already believed before you heard it. But that wasn't David's story. And if you've been paying attention, you already know why. When people hear the phrase renting a girlfriend, something happens in their minds immediately. A picture forms, a transaction, a service rendered, a payment made, two people walking away unchanged. It fits neatly into a category, and categories are comfortable. They tell you how to feel without requiring you to think too hard. What they don't account for is time. 12 hours is a long time to spend with another person, long enough for the performance, if there ever was one, to become exhausting to maintain, long enough for real questions to replace polite ones, long enough for two people from opposite ends of the world to find, in the space between their very different lives, something that resembles genuine recognition, not romance, not transaction, something quieter and more durable than either. David had arrived at that coffee shop in the afternoon, expecting, on some level, to observe, to experience something exotic and return home with an interesting story. Instead, he had been, without quite realizing it, observed in return. Anna had seen him clearly. His loneliness, his restlessness, his half-formed hope that travel might give him back something the years had slowly taken, and she had treated what she saw with a respect he hadn't anticipated and didn't feel he'd entirely earned. That stayed with him. They returned to the mall where they'd first met just as the city was winding down. Shop shutters are descending, security guards moving with the slow authority of people ending a long shift. The bright cathedral of commerce growing quiet around them, the crowd thinned to almost nothing, the music finally, mercifully, off. They stood outside at the entrance where taxis gathered. David thanked her. He meant to say something straightforward, a polite acknowledgement, the verbal equivalent of a handshake, but what came out was more honest than that. "Thank you for the conversations," he said. "More than anything else." Anna smiled. The same smile from the beginning of the day, but he understood it better now. "That's usually the part people don't expect," she said. He thought about that on the taxi ride back to his hotel. He thought about it on the flight home 2 days later, somewhere over the Pacific, the world dark below him and the cabin quiet. He thought about a 29-year-old woman with a plan and a family she loved and a city she navigated with more grace than he'd managed in 30 more years of living. He hadn't rented anything. He'd been given something. And the most honest thing he could say about the Philippines, about that one long, unplanned, quietly extraordinary day, was simply this. He left knowing more than he arrived, about the country, about the people, and uncomfortably and usefully about himself. But this raises a bigger question. Why are so many Western men suddenly choosing the Philippines over other destinations in Southeast Asia? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. Beautiful beaches, a lower cost of living, and a tropical lifestyle. But those reasons alone don't explain why thousands of foreigners keep returning year after year, even when other countries in the region offer similar attractions. The truth is far more complex. For many Western men, the Philippines offers something they feel is becoming harder to find elsewhere. A unique mix of cultural warmth, English-speaking communities, social openness, and a lifestyle that feels more accessible and welcoming to outsiders. But there's also another side to the story, one that rarely makes it into travel brochures or promotional videos. Behind the paradise images are deeper reasons that influence why so many foreigners choose to build lives, relationships, and long-term plans in the Philippines rather than in places like Thailand, Vietnam, or Indonesia. In our next video, we'll break down the real reasons foreign men keep coming back to the Philippines and why this trend continues to grow. Some of the reasons might surprise you, so make sure you subscribe, because the reality of life in Southeast Asia is often very different from the headlines you see online. Do watch the next video on your screen on The Real Deal of Renting a Girlfriend in the Philippines.